Duncan Watkins, who is, if I ever get the opportunity, I bring him onto one of these events, because he brings a unique perspective, as Forrester do so much research within the industry in the background, in all the various threads and developments. And I've asked Duncan to come along today and give us an update on new trends in automation and AI. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Duncan. Your slides are on the screen.
Oh, brilliant. That covers my first question. Can we all see my slide too? Hello, everyone. As Mark said, Duncan Watkins. I work for Forrester. I'm a principal consultant there. And one of the nice things about working for an organization like this is you talk to lots of analysts with big brains, you know, lots of things about AI and automation. So today, really, I'm going to be covering off really kind of four things. So firstly, it's just been built, apologies. So the first thing is some of the market forces around automation and AI. So whereas Vaughan has obviously talked about some of the practical things you can do at the moment, I'll be looking at some of the things that are driving the way automation and AI are going. And we often at the beginning of the year, well, every year we make predictions about what's coming. So I'll talk a little bit about some of our predictions for automation and some of our predictions about AI, but I'll also comment on one of the big areas around this sort of stuff, which is trust. And when you've got, you know, machines essentially making decisions and making work, trust suddenly becomes a big part of the discussion. So I'll talk about some of the things you can do to help with your AI and automation practices that will help build trust with your stakeholders. Okay, so first things first, I'll talk a bit about some of those kind of market forces I was talking about. So there's really kind of three, I think, important things at play here. So the first really is that this idea that we're seeing that sort of 80% of the companies are going to pivot their innovation efforts from sort of creativity to resilience. And that's really as a result of the economic crisis. So last year, a number of companies pulled back innovation due to things like supply issues or staffing shortages, that were all caused by the sort of rising costs and economic unease. And we'll see that to continue this year, where they sort of bring these kind of moonshots back down that still have innovation programs, but they're much more pragmatic and they focus on things like operational resilience rather than, you know, really big ideas. We did a survey last year, which is called a Future Fit survey. And what we see is kind of 8% of business and technology professionals are what we call future fit organizations still agree that innovation is critical to make them more resilient, whereas this is not the case. Only 20% of more traditional organizations. So 2023 will really see this focus on modernizing business processes, making sure automation works practically, you know, doing things like managing supply risk management, really improving the employee experience rather than the next great big thing. Another market force we're seeing is that this talent challenge, and 1 in 3 execs really are looking to tackle this talent challenge with alternative partners. So talent is needed, obviously, to transform businesses, to utilize things like hybrid cloud or build new applications, and they're remaining in short supply. As an example, it currently takes on average 69 days to fill a tech role, compared to 41 days for kind of the overall market. And there's on average about 200,000 open tech jobs globally that can't be filled because of the lack of suitable candidates. So to plug those gaps and improve the capacity and skills, these execs are going to look beyond sort of traditional tech service providing partners to source talent a bit more broadly, or think about alternative methods to plug those gaps, and potentially automation and AI will increasingly become one of those methods to kind of help plug that gap. We'll also see this kind of budgetary change. So there'll be an economic shift from having automation budget in transformation to this more resilience, which backs up kind of the first point. So not only are we looking to change things, but the budget is moving into these areas. So a lot of the economic indicators around this are in a bit of conflict. But one area that really is an agreement is we're living in very uncertain times. And that certainly is pushing executives to a kind of more defensive posture regarding automation investments. So they settle on known risks and issues rather than additional stuff. So that often means shifting budget to using, machine learning, for example, to support risk and resilience efforts and maybe shore up their supply chain gaps. So it's really the easy projects that are going to be getting the cost savings and staff reduction in place, and really those are the ones that are going to be focused on. So that's some of the kind of wider market forces that are affecting what happens with AI and automation. If we move now, we'll talk a bit about some of our predictions on what's going to happen with automation in 2023. So the first one is this idea that kind of this sort of market consolidation around API and RPA vendors is going to move around this data-driven automation. So traditionally, most automation projects sort of tackled static processes, but the sort of insights, the really deep insights we get in data now is changing that. So a lot of organizations will start to prioritize this data-driven automation. So they use things like IoT data from IoT devices to really drive next generation business process transformation. And this is really sending ripples through the kind of process automation vendors. So for example, data management vendors now see a future in kind of working on end-to-end process improvement, which is well beyond their traditional idea of sort of data integration. RPA vendors really enhance their iPaaS and data integration capabilities. So for example, UiPath have acquired a company called Cloud Elements to help them move along this journey. And even some process mining vendors explore real-time events much more now. So this kind of consolidations means the sort of phony war between API and RPA vendors is winding down, because fundamentally all these vendors need access to this data to be able to help their clients, and they don't really care how much they get it. Another prediction really around the effect of this on automation centers of excellence. And we think 1/4 of those will be reorganized to support federated development, i.e. into the business rather than the IT. So these RPA centers of excellence gained prominence really about sort of 2019 as intelligent automation started to really become a thing. And it really required a central and holistic view to scale these things and sort of share and develop skills and really manage the RPA bots. Now that's sort of under control, a number of those tasks will start to move out to the functions and support the primary business lines, as well as more widely in IT. However, some functions, functions such as sort of pipeline, business case management development, design, test, and skills development move close to the business, and because they're the ones that actually consume the automation. However, center of excellence will still stay in place with things like security views, automation architecture, guardrail governance, because they remain central and will remain these dedicated centers because they're the same across the board. And this last one of the predictions on automation will be that there'll be a real problem with skill shortages, and that will slow the progress of automation in 2023. One of the things to think about is digital transformation is quite hard, and our normal processes are struggling with it already. When you add automation on top, that lack of needed skills will cause even bigger issues. So you'll see a kind of slow ramp for business developers to seed with low-code development tools, or skills gaps for professional developers right across that sort of AI spectrum. And there'll also be a shortage of trained analysts and project managers for automation type projects. So these kind of lack of skills will almost create like a chicken and egg situation, to the point I made earlier about, whereas where the skills don't exist, some companies will try to use automation and AI to fill those gaps. However, there won't necessarily be the skills in AI and automation to be able to create that to fill this gap. So there's really a sort of self-perpetuating issue there around all of that. Okay, so these are some of the things we think will kind of cause sorry, didn't click them on. Should never use build slides, but these are kind of some of the issues we see around automation. In AI, we've got kind of 3 big predictions as well, and I think the first one of these is probably the most interesting. So this idea of Turing bots will write 10% of the worldwide code and tests. Now, what we're talking about here is not low code or no code. Turing bots is a phrase we coined in 2020, and it's essentially AI that writes the code itself. Okay, so things like reinforcement learning and large language models have accelerated the development and accuracy of products that can automatically generate code for requirements expressed in natural language. So really, they started off in 2020 covering things like software testing, but today they've developed to be able to do coding themselves. So we expect them to, across the whole software development lifecycle, to take on more and more aspects of that. Some examples are things like Amazon's Code Whisperer, CodeBot, GitHub Copilot, Tab 9, and they're really embedding this into the development tools to make it easy to use as part of that development cycle. An example we've seen was the Better Health Generation organization, which is a kind of health outcome provider. They used CodeBot to generate 91% of the 180,000 lines of application code for a mental health application. That to me is quite a leap, and quite interesting about how artificial intelligence is changing the way we code and develop things. So development teams really need to start planning and experimenting and working with these types of bots, but they need to use a different strategy. They need to think about optimizing and refactoring development with these bots, and really accelerate the adoption of testing so that we get this kind of autonomous and smarter process. But yeah, it's something that's definitely coming. We also think we'll see about 10% of Fortune 500 enterprises will start generating content with AI tools. So the amount of content humans can produce will never be fast enough to really address the needs for really personalized content at scale that we see customers demanding now. So in the next year, we expect to see about 10% of companies invest in digital content creation that's supported by AI. So things like the evolution in transformer networks or pre-trained models, think about sort of ChatGPT-3, are really paving the way for this. So some of the leading vendors like Baidu and Huawei have already launched digital content service providers that are powered by essentially computer vision. And a lot of startups are using AI to accelerate things like video content generation. So what technology leaders need to do is evaluate the business potential of this AI-powered digital content, see how it can accelerate and expand their own content generation, or the recommendations, or delivery for differentiated content to customers at scale. And then the last prediction around AI is that companies will start to drop the human-like pretense for virtual assistants, really to start improving trust. Now, I think we've all experienced examples of this where we've worked with virtual assistants that appear to be human, but soon break down, and we can see the gaps, and we often sometimes have to be handed over to human, or we can see how they don't engage in a human way. So whilst companies are expanding their use cases for kind of conversational AI solutions to support those customer life cycles, to enable customers to buy or handle more complex information, those conversational AI assistants will still be needed to engage and work with audiences, but those virtual assistants pretend to be human are leading to customers really feeling tricked, feeling not trusted in the brand they're working with. So to really start safeguarding this, companies will start to invest in developing personas that are essentially non-human team members, and really embrace that transparency in the identity of the virtual assistant. So next year we'll really see, this year rather, in 2023 already, further experimentation with this idea of an AI persona as brand assets seek to differentiate that conversation interaction with actual dealing with customers. And this transparency will contribute to an increase in, hopefully, in customer trust in those brands, and over the next couple of years. So that leads me neatly onto the next bit, and essentially the trust problem that exists with AI. Now, there's three real causes for this. So first, as we've spoken about, AI can be self-programming. So, most AI leverages machine learning, which codes itself by identifying patterns in training data to really construct a model. So that's quite different from a traditional software development process where humans code to a defined set of rules or logic. So seeding control of that program into machine will inevitably raise trust issues and concerns about errors. And that's often amplified because the process is opaque or too difficult for humans to understand. But yet ultimately it's humans who are using that to make critical decisions. And the writer Pedro Domingos stated in his book, The Master Algorithm, that it's quite interesting. So when algorithms become too intricate for human brains to understand, and when those interactions with different parts of the algorithm are too many or too involved, errors can really creep in. We can't then find them and fix them, and the algorithm ultimately doesn't do what we want. So one of the risks of self-programming is that the AI doesn't do what we're asking it to do inherently. Another problem with trust is the probabilistic nature of AI. So we all know the saying in this world, there's nothing certain but death and taxes. But, you know, in terms of kind of machine learning, there's an element that will be mistrusted as well. So where it learns from real world data and reflects an uncertainty inherent in the world, what it does is come out with a probabilistic method that, because business stakeholders aren't necessarily statisticians, trying a lot of tricky words today, but because they don't necessarily understand the statistics behind it, they're not necessarily accustomed to really using that information to make critical decisions. So you need to get comfortable with the fact that AI is both precise but not 100% accurate. So, you know, what you're trying to do is you're trying to translate the probabilities from an AI into specific business context. So, for example, if you make a prediction with a 95% confidence score, that will be fine if you're thinking about things like customer churn. But if you're trying to diagnose, say, a highly contagious illness, you probably don't want to be making a decision with just that level of confidence. So really understanding that probability and how it equates to what the AI is doing is really important. And one of the other problems with trust is it really holds up a moral mirror to humans. So over the course of history, we know humans haven't treated each other fairly. That resulting inequities embedded in the data we use to train AI systems. As a result, AI learns to replicate that bias and discrimination and injustice that's built into those data sets. So there are some well-known instances out there, like Microsoft's Tay chatbot that within 24 hours become this kind of, headline Hitler-loving sex robot, and Amazon's inability to keep its hiring AI from discriminating against female candidates are all important issues. But there's a repository called the AI Algorithmic and Automation Instance and Controversies Repository, or AIC for short, nice and snappy. But that's actually collected over 850 instances in the past 10 years from a number of sectors that include automotive, consumer goods, public sector, and religion, of things where AI has gone wrong. And so as those instances continue to make headlines, that trust in AI will remain shaky. So we talked a few about predictions. We talked about some of the challenges in trust in AI. I'm now going to talk about some of the things you can do to start to build some trust in AI, and think about how you then articulate that to both your employees and customers. So one of the first things, and this is not purely for AI, but it's about demonstrating competence. So you want to quantify and communicate uncertainty. So AI learns its uncertainty from real world data, and its output, as we said, is probabilistic. So fortunately, most machines learn how to quantify that level of certainty in their predictions. Now, financial institutions are used to this. They've been working with probabilities forever. They have long established models around risk management functions that are used to assess risks. Other entities really need to start adopting those best practices from financial services on model risk management. So with financial services, the practice needs to evolve to assess risks of implementation of AI. So business stakeholders need to understand exactly where AI is most vulnerable, where it'd be most successful, and use those risk models from financial services to really be open about what the problems are. There's another idea about ensuring consistency with this idea called model ops to really detect and mitigate performance issues. So successful AI deployments do not always correlate to future success as a model's performance can degrade over time. And this is caused by a thing called model drift. So production environments are always dynamic realms. They're vulnerable to gradual change and rapid disruption. So it means that the data a model was trained on does not necessarily look like the new data is being fed, which can cause the performance to wane. So we try and do this idea of baking in model ops. So the tools, technology, and practices that enable this kind of cross-functional AI teams to be efficient and deploy, monitor, and retrain their tools. They need to constantly practice this, and that will reduce the risk of drift and sustain stakeholder trust through a consistent performance. The third thing is really dependability, and this comes through show and simulation. So we talked about the uncertainty that's inherent in this world, and come to terms with these challenges, and where it's tasked with predicting something. It's difficult when it's something as complex as human behavior we're talking about. So one way to ease concerns about its dependability is to start simulating situations virtually before testing the model in the real world. So techniques like the Monte Carlo simulation leverage historical data to simulate future values and random variables and predict the probability of future outcomes. Example of this was called a scale task. We're tasked with reducing emergency room visits for low intensity health problems. So they first simulated interventions for different at-risk groups to redirect them to more appropriate resources such as their GP or something like that. And they could then refine their approach iteratively to find which interventions would work best for their patients in different situations. And they're only tried in the real world once they are confident with the results. And then really the last way of building trust internally is this idea of transparency through traceability. So if a decision is traceable, it can be trusted. The problem is most machine learning models at best obfuscate their inner workings, make it difficult to understand intuitively how they arrived at a particular outcome. A new type of technique called explainable AI encompasses a wide variety of approaches to improve the model transparency and the interpretability of individual instances on a model-wide level. So by understanding what makes a model tick, data scientists can engender trust with business stakeholders, proving that models are arriving at recommendations for the right reasons. But traceability also needs to extend beyond the model itself. It needs to extend upstream to how the use case was identified, what data was used to train the model, as well as downstream to how the model output was used to make a decision. So it's not just about the model itself. Those are all the methods we can use to start to build trust internally. What can we do externally? Well, what we're seeing a lot of organizations doing is hiring a chief ethics officer or a chief trust officer to ensure their integrity. So you will have a diverse cast of people working towards AI and trying to make it fair, but the risk is that becomes very broad but not very deep. A senior leader is responsible for defining the values, setting the priorities, that guides companies' IO process is important. But these leaders need to be more than just a mouthpiece. They have the ability to change the ways of working within an organization. An example we've seen is Salesforce have got an officer for humane and ethical use of technology. They sit within the product team to ensure consistent application of policies across product development. Now, a lot of companies won't have the budget or scale for specialist roles like this, so they can become the remit of a more established C title. So CIOs, chief data officers, CISOs are all adequate people, but they may require some more specialist training to really get this deep understanding of AI trust. Another important piece externally is to hold yourself accountable for bad decisions. So accountability in AI means taking responsibility for the impact of AI on all of your stakeholder groups, from customers to society to the environment. So we mentioned about, AI is probabilistic, so it won't always make the right call, no matter what degree of human or mathematical certainty went into a decision. So rather than pointing fingers or what some call frantically asked questions, you can follow a simple 3-step process to demonstrate accountability. First is taking ownership of the mistake. Secondly is explaining why the mistake occurred. Third is really taking action to ensure you don't repeat it in the future. when you're seen to do that, then that really helps to build trust externally, and the company itself will continually improve by using the new data. And the last one is really trying to imbue a degree of empathy through stakeholder feedback. So really, a bit of a cliche, but it can really take a village to raise a good AI model. So harmful bias isn't always obvious, and rooting out is the most insidious piece of this work, and it really needs a diverse and represented group of people working on it. So Olay, for part of its Decode the Bias campaign, hired the O'Neill risk consultant algorithmic auditing to audit its skin advisor system. So it uses computer vision to analyze pictures of faces and then provide personal skincare recommendations. What O'Neill did was spoke to internal stakeholders as well as external ones, such as the users and experts, to really create some algorithmic justice, to weed out concerns of potential harms that could come with recommending clearly inaccurate skin advice for different skin types. Really, what companies need to do is kind of go on the offensive to try and prevent that harmful bias creeping in to their products. So that really covers the areas I want to go about today. As we can see, AI and automation are really growing in importance. They're increasingly become part of the mainstream part of organizations. They're not just these idea of moonshots anymore. But with that, with them being built into the way companies work, comes a sense of responsibilities around ethics and trust that you have to address if you're going to make them successful. Well, that takes me through what I want to go. It's open to any questions if anyone's got any, or anybody wants to make any points.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Duncan. These Turing bots seem to take us into a whole different world, don't they?